At this point, I've played a lot of Hell Clock. I've crushed both Abyss and Oblivion, and then pushed all the way to Hell 50 in Ascension. And today, I want to share the best builds that I've played so far, along with some of their core mechanics. Now, for most of the builds that I'm going to talk about, I made full videos, and I'll link those up in the card and down below if you want to learn more. In addition, I've not played every single build that's possible in Hell Clock. I've played a lot of them, but not all of them, so it is entirely possible that there is a really good build that I just haven't played yet. And for this video, I really wanted to stick to things that I have played. So, with that said, let's get into things in no particular order. A good place to start is the Holy Rosary Summoner. When I played this build, it felt absolutely ridiculous. I was running through maps, obliterating everything, and really all you need to get it off the ground is the bead necklace. This causes the Holy Rosary to fire automatically, turning your build into a walking simulator. And for the early game, that's honestly going to be enough all on its own. Later, you might need a little bit of damage scaling. So, add in Worker's Tools. Now, instead of the Rosary spawning around yourself, it spawns from your minions, and you can use Summon Catholic Guard to have a whole bunch of minions running all over the place. This does vastly lower the skill's base damage, and I'm not sure if this next part is a bug or not, so if it gets fixed in the future, I will try to remember to put a pinned comment letting people know. But Worker's Tools vastly lowers the base damage at skill level 1. However, additional skill levels seem to scale as normal. So by the time the skill reaches max level, the base damage is actually pretty high. And you can use Golden Chaplet to give it a big boost. Since you're triggering it automatically via Bead Necklace, you technically don't need it on your bar. However, I recommend keeping it there anyway, as that unlocks additional blessings for more damage scaling options. Speaking of, what do you do if you want to take the damage to the next level? Well, then it's time to add Holy Water and Written Promise. Then click all of the things that say Conviction. This will scale your damage to absurd levels because you're able to stack tens or hundreds of thousands of resolve. It also means you can spend a bunch of time running around a map, getting to a boss, and then pop all of your potions and annihilate the boss because you gained a massive amount of resolve, which, thanks to Written Promise, is translated into base damage that's then scaled by all your blessings and other fun stuff. But okay, if 4 minions summoning Spinny Balls of Doom wasn't enough for you, add in Toll of the Dead and Call of the Guard. Now, you can spam bells to summon more minions, and then use Guard's Rage to double them for even more spinny Doom Balls of Death. When I'd originally played this build, the setup was all upside, with no downside. But recently, Toll of the Dead adds a 3-second cooldown to the bell. Now, I recently tested this in Oblivion, and the build is still super strong, and it tears through bosses. I didn't fully set things up correctly, and I was doing tens of billions of DPS. That's just because I didn't have the relics in Oblivion that I'd used in my original run. Because the thing is, with the right constellation setup, you can reduce the cooldown of a bell by continually generating both power and agility orbs. Also, since I last played the build, I did find a better constellation setup, so let's go into that for just a bit here. Alright, so constellations. Start in the Faith path, then immediately fill out everything here. This will get you Thunder of Creation, which is pretty good damage in the early game, and the access to power orbs that you're going to need very soon. The second thing you take over here is agility orbs. The reason you want both power and agility orbs is for Never-Ending Cycle. This reduces all active cooldowns by 1 second when you gain an agility orb or a power orb. So orb scaling is very strong, and the core of a lot of constellation setups actually. Now in terms of some things more specific to the build, I recommend coming over here for lightning damage into Light the Darkness. Hitting an enemy with lightning damage, which you'll be doing constantly, reduces their lightning resistance. You can also come all the way up here for the Moon, where enemies hit by lasso can receive an additional 10 stacks for 10 seconds. As a note, you want to use the Northerner Belt to do this, and yes, the build is a little tight on relics, so if you can't do this, then just drop this point and put it over here for some more lightning damage until you can, and respec later, since you can do that now. After that, fill out all of this, because Saint Hedwig offers multiplicative summon damage. This is a very strong way to scale your damage, and you're going to get this about at a point towards the end of a campaign where you'll need it. If you're struggling, you can also drop this for the multiplicative summon damage, as I believe it is slightly more impactful if you don't have the Northerner Belt. Now after that, you'll need to take 1 point in the Fury path to unlock additional constellations, because this is a very faith discipline heavy setup. You can come down here to get more conviction scaling, over here for gold gain and quality of life. And then last up, this is a great constellation for generic defensive bonuses and move speed, because why not just run through the level faster while taking even less damage because you don't have to stop to attack, you can just keep on running. So that is a new constellation setup. In terms of how many points, I have 40 here after completing Abyss and Oblivion. If you're playing in Ascension, you may have more and you may have less. Also, some feedback I had based on my video. On my initial run, I found that projectile speed and projectile duration scaled the Rosary damage very well, since these are additional multipliers. This is still the case. However, this can cause quite a bit of lag. So if you're having laggy issues, stick to damage and don't take these additional multipliers. You should have enough DPS that it's totally fine. One of my favorite parts about this build is the passive damage, being able to just run past enemies, killing them to gain EXP and gold. This makes clearing content a breeze, and it also makes it very easy to farm if, say, you're just going through Abyss and Oblivion and you need some more soul stones because you want to buy a whole bunch of upgrades. One last thing, remember to use Passage to reposition your minions. This is very helpful for bosses, because I noticed sometimes without the reposition, my minions would hover just slightly outside of Rosary range and shoot the enemy, which is really unfortunate. So overall, this is a very fun build. Yes, it was nerfed, but it's still great. It tore through early Ascensions for me, and it is super strong in both Abyss and Oblivion. Now next up, a build that I played more recently and used to clear Hell 50 is the Marksman Ignite Explosion build. This setup rapidly inflicts Ignite to then trigger explosions by using Marksman skills. You can play it with either Repeater or Split Shot, and it is very fun to watch explosions chain across the screen and tear through crowds of enemies. Now, the core of this build is Powder Bag combined with Silver Bullets when using a Fire Marksman skill. By default, Split Shot does fire damage, making it a great choice. But if you use the Molten Relic, you can also convert Repeater's damage over to fire as well. Now, Powder Bag triggers an explosion when a Marksman skill deals physical damage to an ignited enemy. And this is where the fire damage comes in. You need fire damage to inflict ignites on enemies. And to trigger the effect, you need both fire and physical damage at once. So you might be saying, wait a minute. How are we dealing physical damage if we're doing stuff like converting our skill over to fire? That's where Silver Bullets comes in. This gives your Marksman skills physical damage based on your conviction. And so then, your Marksman skills deal both physical and fire in the same hit, igniting enemies and continually triggering explosions. All you have to do is sit back, enjoy the fireworks, and maybe put on some sunglasses. In terms of ways to scale this even more, well, Garrison Supplies doubles your projectile count during the active effect of Prayer of Vengeance. You can also use the Northerner Belt to group enemies for even more explosion overlaps. Both of these have a notable effect on your DPS, but they aren't required for the build to function, so you can always pick them up later on in your run, or if you're doing Ascension and you don't happen to get them, no big deal, you should be fine to clear the run regardless. And hey, that's not enough damage for you? Well, maybe look for some rare relics with skill projectile amount. The exact scaling here is going to depend on if you're using Split Shot, which I found scaled a lot better with skill projectile amount, or Repeater, which did scale with it, but it also led to some kind of wonky stuff where if you got too many skill projectiles, the Repeater just sort of existed after you stopped firing. Very funny looking, but not necessarily the most practical since the aim was kind of locked to where you'd been shooting before. Either way, grabbing a few makes the build feel significantly better, and you can also get more projectiles from a Blessing of Foundation. Personally, I was surprised at how easy this build was to scale in the early game, which is why this is the build that I ended up using to beat Hell 50 in Ascension. Now, I did find there was a little bit more mana management than some of the other things on this list, but by later Act 2 and then early Act 3, I had enough maximum mana that I wasn't really thinking about it anymore. And by the time I beat the Hell 50, I had 10 full runs left in my Ascension, so I was able to blast through all 3 acts in no time. I ended up playing the Repeater version here because that felt a little bit smoother to me, especially because to really maximize your damage with Split Shot, you need to get up close, and Repeater you can either be close or stand back from a distance. But with that said, I think in really good gear, especially if you're going for Abyss or Oblivion, that Split Shot does end up scaling better, especially with those additional projectiles. Just remember, you do not want to use Blunderbuss for this version of a build, as you need your Split Shot to deal fire damage, and Blunderbuss converts the damage over to physical. But in short, if you like explosions, and you want something that feels kind of like a Demon Hunter from Diablo 3, then I can absolutely recommend this build if you want to push some Ascensions. Then, last but not least, I want to talk about Veil of Quills. This is the first thing I played that actually felt like a real build. With the recent addition of Abyss and Oblivion, I went back and min-maxed it some more. So if you want to summon an almost limitless number of projectiles and fill your screen with, yes, more explosions, because of course there are more explosions, this is the build for you. How many projectiles do I have? Yes. The core of a build is combining Mark of a Vulture with Relic Dagger. When you have Mark of a Vulture, your Quills stack a debuff on enemies, causing a Plague Explosion when the enemy reaches 7 stacks. So for every 7 projectiles, or every 7 projectile hits you inflict, explosion. With Relic Dagger, the Quills pierce the enemy, and since it has homing, this means the Quill loops back around and hits the same target again, triggering even more explosions. Now, like with the Holy Rosary build that I mentioned before, you can also use Holy Water and Written Promise to continue scaling your damage by stacking Conviction. After all, this is a spell build, and it works particularly well with the Tier 8 gear and Tier 4 relics that are available in Abyss and Oblivion. When I first played this build, I'd been experimenting a little bit with the Northerner build. This triggers Lasso, which is pretty nice for grouping enemies. And it is very nice here. More groups equals more explosions and more overlaps for damage. But that said, if you don't find it, it really isn't a big deal. This is very much a nice to have, not a requirement. But I also found this build has a really nice playstyle. It's not exactly a walking simulator, but you can tap Veil of Quills, and you'll get a whole bunch of projectiles that follow you and chase enemies for a bit. So you blast through a section of a map, then you tap Veil of Quills again, you get more projectiles, you blast through more enemies, maybe you click a shrine or go open a treasure chest or pick up some loot, then you tap it again, all the way until you reach a boss or a survival wave. And if you want to make a boss go away, well, just pop all of your potions and you will burst down the boss in seconds, or in lower difficulties, fraction of a second. Since the quill damage scales off Conviction, spamming potions allows you to build up a huge amount of burst damage. Though that said, this does feel a little bit broken, so it's entirely possible it's going to be nerfed in the future. Overall, this has remained my favorite build out of everything I've tried in Hellclock so far. Maybe it's because this is the first build I played and the first build that I found success with. Maybe it's because it's just really fun and satisfying to watch the screen get covered in projectiles and explosions. But either way, if you try no other build from this list, give Veil of Quills a shot. Oh, also, if you're just starting out on a new Ascension run, it surprisingly isn't terrible. Not quite as smooth as the Marksman skills, but not horrible either. Now, before I wrap things up, I want to end with a couple of honorable mentions. These are things that I haven't put a lot of time into playing or scaling, so I don't have a video on them. But I've messed around with them a little bit, they're cool concepts, and so I think they're worth mentioning here. The first of which is Split Shot Summoner. The basic idea is summon an army, and then shoot stuff with sniper rifles. Remember how earlier I said for the Marksman build you don't use Blunderbuss because it converts Split Shot from fire to physical? Well, Blunderbuss also converts the shotgun-like slugs into a single powerful round that does absolutely massive damage. And the more projectiles you have, the more massive the damage. So, this is a Blunderbuss build, which would normally reduce your coverage a lot, except now you're going to be using stolen weapons, so that instead of just you firing your one sniper round, it is a whole bunch of minions firing theirs. And yes, you can also use Toll of the Dead here. I didn't find Call of the Guard to be great, because I found the playstyle was smoother when I gave my guards a lot of attack speed, as opposed to simply making more guards. And from there, well, this is still a marksman skill, so throw on silver bullets and garrison supplies for even more damage. And of course, Hellclock takes after ARPGs, so I would be remiss if I didn't mention a spin to win build. And in this case, that is Double Knives, specifically with lightning conversion and also lightning conversion on reflexes. It's what I used to clear Act 1 of a campaign, and back then I didn't really know what I was doing, plus I didn't have most of the meta progression that really helps to scale builds crazily. One thing I haven't tried yet is it might be worth going a bleed route, where you inflict bleeding using double knives and then scale reflexes using extra damage versus bleeding enemies. Haven't actually tried that yet, but it seems pretty cool. And while I did mess with this a bit at lower levels, I never played a properly min-max setup because as I kept pushing into higher and higher content, I started lagging a bit more with this one. I think it's because Double Knives hits a lot, and I found it very easy to get tanky with lifesteal and with additional defenses, but a little less easy to scale the damage since you can't just go, oh, it has conviction scaling, and then just laugh as you have hundreds of thousands of conviction. But that said, Double Knives is definitely on my list of builds to revisit in the future. And so those are the 3 best builds that I've played in Hellclock so far, along with a couple of honorable mentions. Now, if you want to know more about the Holy Rosary Summoner, the Repeater build, or the Veil of Quills build, I'll have videos for all 3 of those up in the card and down below, detailing all the gear I used, the relics, the constellations, the bell tree, pretty much everything you name it. Also, there's plenty more content coming to Hellclock in the future. Right now, the Ascension's in beta, a lot of the constellations aren't accessible, and there's even hints of item crafting potentially coming in the future. So I'm sure I'm going to be trying more builds and talking about them in future videos. If that sounds interesting to you, do be sure to get subscribed. But with that said, I'm going to get going for now. At this point, I've played a lot of Hellclock. I cleared Ascension 50, which was pretty fun, but I'm probably going to take a break for now. As I said, a lot of stuff is coming on the horizon, and I don't want to burn myself out just playing the content that exists right now. So with that, thank you very much for watching to the end. If you enjoyed, do be sure to leave a like, and with that, I'll see you in the next one.